Oh, hey guys, Review 4 deals with Jacksonian democracy, again, a return to the common man and manifest destiny. So, the first thing I have to refer to is we just ended the Virginia dynasty with the Democrats ruling most of it, and we had the death of the Federalist Party. So we know in the election of 1824, it is all Democratic Republicans running against each other. They're from different sections. We know Clay is from the West, Crawford is from Georgia, Jackson is from the West, and John Quincy Adams represents New England. And what we're going to see, because of 4 people running in the election, there's not going to be a clear majority winner in the electoral college. And so this will lead to the election going to the House of Representatives. And they only take the top 3 candidates. We know Clay has the least amount of votes, so he's out. Crawford, Jackson, and John Quincy Adams, the election will go to the House on them, but Crawford has a stroke. So the election now really is between Jackson and Adams. They're all Democratic Republicans, and we're going to see that Clay is eliminated, but he has the influence because he's the Speaker of the House. And this is going to lead to him realizing that down the road, if he's ever going to win, he really will not win against Jackson because Jackson's from the West. The West is now getting more suffrage as new states are entering in, allowing universal manhood suffrage. So Clay will throw his support behind Adams. And many see this is a corrupt bargain because Jackson actually gets the popular vote. Clay gets the second most votes. Clay gets the last votes. Adams gets the second most votes. And Adams will win the election because Clay throws his support behind him in the House of Representatives. And many people look at this as a corrupt bargain because Clay will get the Secretary of State. Many people see that position as a diving tail into the presidency. But this will lead to Jackson being irate about what's going on and for the next 4 years campaigning. This era will be called Jacksonian democracy because, yes, Jackson doesn't start off the era, but Jackson will immediately campaign after this era to encourage people to go out and vote in the next election. We will see John Quincy Adams will be unpopular, but he is going to establish basically what we know as the Whig Party, and they are going to replace our former Federalists, and they're going to believe in big government. He's a nationalist, and he's going to build roads and canals, and we know those roads and canals only benefit the North and the West, and they're going to be funded through tariffs, and this is what's going to lead to angst amongst the Southerners. One of the things that's passed in John Quincy Adams' administration is the Tariff of Abominations. This tariff is going to raise tariffs to 45%, which will protect the New England merchant at the expense of the consumer who has to pay higher prices, specifically the farmer who gets no protection in the world market, specifically in America, from other goods. And so Jackson is in office and he has to enforce this, even though he's against it, but that's the job of the executive. But his vice president, John C. Calhoun, is going to secretly write the South Carolina Exposition. That idea that if a state does not like a federal government and if it's a burden to them, they should have the right to nullify that law. Again, an idea that we saw under Jefferson and Madison when they were upset about the Alien and Sedition Act and they wrote the Virginia and Kentucky Resolution. Sorry, I just got an email. We're going to see that he brings up this idea that states have the right to nullify. Again, we know this leads to the Civil War, and this is what's going to be in the Civil Rights Movement, and this is going to begin the idea of a sectionalism. The South is going to say, hey, we do not want to pay this, and eventually it's going to lead to a crisis in the Jacksonian era, which eventually we'll get to, but I need to go to the election of 1828 before I get to that. We're going to see the election of 1828 is going to be epochal because there is more Western states coming in. They have universal white manhood suffrage, and they're going to vote for Jackson. We also get the commencement of the political convention, and we're going to see this in next August, in 2020, where people get to elect in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who they want to back. as their candidate. And it's no longer these very rich people sitting around and deciding who gets to get elected. We're going to see Jackson will also introduce the spoils system for those people who've helped him get elected. He's going to bring them into office again. They're not the best. We're going to see this election. It's also going to bring out mudslinging, the whole idea that you bring out everybody's dirt. John Quincy Adams, the dirt on him is that he helped the Russian Tsar get ladies of the night. We're going to see that he has a billiards table and he's a single man. And we're going to see that John Quincy Adams will bring about Jackson, about his wife Rachel, and how his wife had 2 husbands because she didn't fully get rid of her divorce. And amidst this, Rachel will die because of the strain it puts on her heart. And so this whole mudslinging that we kind of see today in modern politics of bringing out people's dirt and what they did in the past is going to usher in a new type of political campaigning. Jackson will win, and it shows many people fear that our nation is moving from the smobs to the mobs. And we are seeing that our political center is shifting to the West because these Western states are giving universal manhood suffrage. No more land tying to you being able to vote. So Jackson will come into office, and we're going to see, yes, he's a Democrat, and yes, he believes in states' rights and a small government, but he's often going to go against that. He's uncompromising. He makes his decisions based on his opinion, not law. He's going to ignore the Supreme Court, and eventually he's going to veto a lot of congressional action, which will expand the power of the presidency. And he's going to be both nationalistic, wanting a big government, and both sectionalistic, wanting states' rights. I'm not going to focus on the Peggy Eaton affair. I'm going to go straight down to the tariff abominations. The Peggy Eaton affair will eventually lead to John C. Calhoun fleeing office, and now Martin Van Buren will become the vice president of Jackson. That's all we'll talk about Peggy Eaton. But I'm going to look at the tariffs. The tariff abomination, we know this raises the tariff up to 45%. It's protecting our New England merchants at the expense of the consumer. And this is going to lead to a skirmish because many southern states, specifically South Carolina, saying it should have the right to nullify this law because it's oppressive to their people. And we're going to see this will lead to debates in Congress about states' right. Do states really have this, or should the states follow the federal government? And Webster is going to be one of the people, along with Clay, Calhoun, and Webster, that are trying to negotiate this. We know Calhoun has written the South Carolina Exposition. Eventually, compromise is not reached yet. And this is going to lead to a convention in South Carolina where they say, hey, if the government doesn't lower it, we will either leave, secede, or we will fight. And we will see Clay will negotiate a compromise that will negotiate it to 35%, but they feel that this is not enough. And Jackson will respond, look, you either pay it or we're going to invade you. And he's going to do the Force Act that they will send in a military and to get this paid. At this moment, no one else rises up with South Carolina. And eventually Clay will save the day by lowering the tariff to about 20%, over 20% over the next few years. And this basically dissolves the situation. But the crisis, yes, it's over, but it keeps on setting this precedent that if a state does not like a federal law and it wants it to be nullified, it has the right, or if it doesn't get what it wants, it could secede, which basically sets up the whole idea of what will happen in America with the Civil War. We're going to see a road act is going to be vetoed by Jackson because he hates Clay, because it would put a road in Kentucky. One of the things that Jackson, again, he really dislikes is the bank. We know that Jackson has had some bad investments with the bank, and he nearly went bankrupt in the last Panic of 1819. But Jackson really wants to get rid of this money-eyed monster because he feels it's in the hands of the rich. He feels that it's a big federal institution. And so Nicholas Biddle will lead to the last bank president because Jackson will take it as a mandate of the people when he wins to take down the bus because he feels the bus is a monopoly. It only favors the rich. It's against the common man. He doesn't like the foreign ownership. And they also prevent the amount of money from inflating because they require that all banknotes be backed in gold. And so in the election of 1832, Clay is going to bring up the issue of the bank, and Jackson's going to be vehemently against it. And Jackson will win, and so he takes his mandate to the people to kill the bus, and he kills the bus by removing the money, and he puts it in these pet banks. These pet banks then use this money for land speculation and internal improvements. But that money was supposed to be left there to pay off the federal debts. And when those that pet banks spend that money and they don't get it back from the land speculators and the internal improvements, there will be a money shortage. The federal government cannot pay off its debts. And this will result in Congress passing the Specie Circular Act because much of the money by the pet banks was loaned out in land speculation. They're going to require that every piece of land bought in the West be paid in gold and silver, which will shrink the money supply in the economy, which will cause the panic. And again, by 37, Jackson is out. Van Buren is in. And he's realizing the destruction of the bank along with the Specie Circular with the wildcat practices of inflating the money currency has led to it. And we're having economic problems in Europe because they're taking out our loans from the banks and they're requiring the payment. And along with the drought, the panic is severe. And so we will eventually see, and I'm going to go down here, that Van Buren inherits the problems of the bus. And he will eventually, right down here, he will solve the panic by creating the Independent Treasury Act, where he puts the American government's money in places like Fort Knox, which is not in the money supply. So then the banks cannot loan out money, so which further restricts our banking system. So that's the whole thing with the Bank of the United States being killed. We'll see our next bank created when we get into the Civil War. I want us to look at these acts right here. Under Jackson's administration, we're going to see two cases come out, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. Both of these basically say that Indians have title to their land and that the federal government, they are subservient to the federal government, but they have their own sovereignty in their land. We see Cherokee Nation gives them title to the land, sovereignty on their land. Worcester versus Georgia basically says Georgia cannot come in and put laws on these areas. Eventually, gold is found on their land, and this will lead to the Indian Removal Act, where they will renegotiate their contracts, give up their land, sell it to the federal government, and the federal government will send them on the Trail of Tears to land in the West. Okay, we're going to see that the election of 1836 is going to lead to Martin Van Buren, the Democrat, who's kind of popular because of Jackson, versus Harrison, the Whig. And this Whig idea is that they believe in big government. And Van Buren will win. And we see that the Whig party is going to form, and mainly they're against Jackson. They're pro-bus, pro-tariff, pro-strong central government, and they have their backing from the wealthy. They are basically replacing our Federalist Party. Okay? So what we're going to look at the same time of Jackson's administration, we have Manifest Destiny. And so right here you have all the list of our acquisitions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this map. We know this first area right here of this white area that has no name, that's the original 13 colonies. And then 1783 Paris Treaty, we see that this is area that is in the Treaty of Paris that's given to the Americans after the American Revolution. And that will send the westward motion of the first few states coming into our union. So that's originally the United States. We see the War for Independence, the Treaty of Paris, that gives us that because it gives us our borders up to Canada, to Mississippi, all the way down to Florida. Our next purchase was in the Jeffersonian era, which is the Virginia dynasty, and we know it's the Louisiana Purchase, this next area. We know that this was sold by Napoleon. He originally had the idea that this area would be a food supply for Haiti, but Haiti will have its revolution in the Haitian Revolution, and he no longer needs this area. He's also at war prior to the War of 1812 with the British, and he's very fearful that they could acquire this land. He needs money for a war, and he sells it at a recordly low price of 3 cents an acre to the Americans. Jefferson has some qualms with the addition of this area, that he had no legal right, according to the Constitution, to get this area in, but he purchased it because he realized that this would prevent war. Also, it would allow for Western farmers to migrate west. Eventually, we know this area will lead to the Missouri Compromise, that we will bring in Missouri. And we're going to establish this line right here, 3630, that no slavery can exist above it, and slavery can exist below it. Maine will come in over here as a free state to keep that balance. So as we move west, we have this whole idea of maintaining a balance between free and slave state that could prevent any one legislation going through the Senate that could possibly abolish slavery or perpetually keep slavery in America. It also established the precedent that Congress will come in to make an idea or a law about slavery. Our next acquisition is Florida, and we know that this Florida Purchase Treaty dealt with issues during the Monroe administration, with Indians getting a little bit crazy down there, runaway slaves going down into Florida. Spain has left this area to actually recapture control in their Latin American colonies, and Jackson is sent down to establish rule and order. He does that and kills a couple of people. And we will see that he creates $5 million in debt, and this will lead to the Florida Purchase Treaty, where the U.S. will get control of Florida, but the U.S. will have to give up claims to Mexico, Texas, to Spain. Our next territorial acquisition is Maine. So I'm going to go to the map. And it's this top part of Maine right here, because we're going to see Canada at this time and the U.S. had joint occupation of this area. Canada wants to build a road to Halifax because the St. Lawrence Seaway freezes over during the year. And we're going to see our lumberjacks are going to get very upset about this, because it would be taking down very prominent trees in the area that could be harvested later. And so this is going to lead to an almost war, but Webster will negotiate the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, where they agree to share this land, that 5,000 square miles will go to the British, and they will be able to build their road, and the U.S. will get 7,000 square miles of this, and this will lead to our upper border of Maine. Our next territorial acquisition is Texas. Originally, Texas wanted to come in as an independent, as a new state under Jacksonian era. But many Whigs feared that if Texas came in, Texas could be divided into 5 different states. So under Jackson's era, Texas does not come in. It will become an independent republic. And in this time of being an independent republic, it will trade with the United States. Many Americans will move into this area, and we're going to see that Texas is going to be ideal for cotton producing. Eventually, under the Polk administration, he's going to run his campaign for election of Texas or fight, and 5440 or fight. And 5440 is way up here above Oregon, where it is the area between America and Canada, where both areas claim it. And Polk will win that election. But the president who was sitting at that time, his name is Tyler, and he realized the popularity of Texas coming into the Union, and he's going to get a joint resolution to bring in Texas. And so this is why Polk's thunder will be stolen by Tyler, and we get a Tyler, Texas in East Texas versus a Polk, Texas, to honor him. Our next purchase, actually at this time, is not a purchase, but it's settling boundary disputes, is Oregon. And we know this dealt with the Polk administration. Let me go back to my map. Sorry, this review 5. That this dealt with 5440 or fight, but at this time, we could either go to war with the British to obtain all the way up to this area, Or we could go to war with Mexico to obtain legal rights to Texas and possibly get the Mexican cession. Instead of fighting for Oregon, the treaty will be negotiated that we will recognize the 49th parallel as the boundary between Oregon and Canada, and this will set up that perimeter there. Our next fight is for the Mexican cession. We are going to see that this is a war with Mexico. Once we claim Texas as ours, Polk really says, wow, if we were to go all the way down to this area and obtain a coast on the Pacific, it'd be great for trade. And instead of going to war with the British for Oregon, we're going to go to war with Mexico for not only Texas, but the Mexican cession. We are going to see that American soldiers will be sent down to our border at Texas, which we think is the Rio Grande. Mexico thinks it's the Nueces River. Once soldiers cross across the Nueces River, this will lead to an open feud between Mexico and the U.S., and the war will start. Eventually, people will be sent down to negotiate the treaty. Santa Anna doesn't agree to it, but eventually he will agree to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which will give us access and claims to everything west to the Pacific Ocean. The last thing that is actually bought is the Gadsden Purchase. We watched a video on Jimmy Fallon doing all the purchases. Remember that at this time last year? We are going to see that we buy the Gadsden Purchase because we want to build a railroad, but if we look at this issue right here, we have the Rocky Mountains. The Gadsden Purchase is actually a flat piece of land that could build a railroad on the southern junction. Again, the railroad won't be built during the Civil War, but it's going to take that northern route. So let's go back to our notes. Okay, so now we know we go back to the election of Van Buren versus Harrison. Van Buren's time period has been marred by issues of the bank and an economic decline because of the Panic of 1837, which was because Jackson took the money out of the bust, put it in the pet banks. Pet banks had used that money for land speculation and for internal improvements and not been able to pay back. So the Whigs realized that they cannot tote being the party of the wealthy. And so they're going to run Harrison as a common man, that he was born in a log cabin, he drinks hard cider, and they're basically going to tell Harrison not to speak. Because if he does say that he's for the wealthy, if he does says he's for a bank, if he does says he's for internal improvements and higher tariffs, he's going to lose the common man. So Harrison doesn't speak, and they basically come up with this whole that he is a common man and Harrison will win. And because he was not able to talk during the most of his campaign, he will give the longest inaugural speech, and he does it without a coat. He'll get pneumonia, and he's going to die. And this leads to Tyler, who's his vice president, who's actually a Democrat who has moved to the Whig Party to attract other common men. Tyler will become president. He will deal with the main border dispute, and also he brings in Texas through joint resolution. Eventually, before he leaves, and he knows this is popular because that's what Polk had campaigned on. I've already talked about Polk. Polk is going to run on this idea of Texas or fight and 54-40 or fight. And eventually Polk will win, and he gets in Oregon. We were going to fight for 54-40, but he stops it there because we're at war with Mexico, and he agrees to the 49th parallel. In Miss Polk's administration, we will double the size of America with the Mexican cession when we go to war with Mexico. Okay, the big dilemma over the Mexican cession is, what do we do with this? As we add this in, it's a new territory, the Louisiana Purchase, Missouri Compromise idea doesn't apply here. And so we're going to see the Whigs with the Wilmot Proviso, that alliteration, are going to try to eliminate slavery here. It will fail, but this will lead to siege mentality, that they're trying to stop the extension of slavery, which if there's no other new slave states coming in, this leads to the South being unbalanced, which will eventually lead to California coming in, offsetting that balance, which we will get to in our next review.